My name is Eleanor Briggs. I am 62 years old. And on a Friday evening in April, at a retirement party held in my honor after 31 years at the same company, a man I had worked alongside for 16 of those years stood up in a room full of my colleagues and called me a thief. I want to tell you what a retirement party looks like before I tell you what happened at mine. It looks like people you have known for a very long time, gathered in a room together with food and drinks and the particular warmth of an occasion that is both a celebration and a goodbye. It looks like photographs on a display board. The young version of you that makes everyone laugh, the project milestones, the team photos from years that feel simultaneously very close and very far away. It looks like speeches from people who have worked beside you and who have things to say about what that working together meant. My retirement party looked like all of those things. The Meridian Group's executive conference room on the 14th floor of our Chicago office, decorated by the events team that Sandra from HR had quietly coordinated. 51 colleagues. The CEO. My direct team. People I had mentored, who had become people I admired. My husband, Robert, in the seat of honor nearest the door, looking proud in the specific way he looks proud, quietly, steadily, in a way that does not require an audience. It looked like everything a retirement party should look like, until Gary Moss stood up. Gary was 64 years old, 2 years my senior, a senior financial analyst who had been at Meridian for 20 years. We had worked in parallel, never directly together, different departments, with the professional cordiality of people who occupy the same building and the same company culture, without occupying the same actual work. He had always been pleasant in the way of people who are pleasant when they do not have a specific reason not to be. He stood up during the open remarks portion of the evening, after the CEO had spoken, after my direct manager, Patricia, had spoken, after 2 members of my team had spoken, and made me cry in a way I was trying to manage with moderate success. The room was warm and loud and happy. Gary stood up and the room gave him the polite attention it had been giving all the speakers. He pointed at me. "She didn't earn any of this," he said. "She's a thief." The room went silent the way a room goes silent when something happens that every person in it needs a moment to confirm they heard correctly. Not the gradual quiet of an ending, but the sudden, total quiet of a circuit breaking. Every eye in the room turned to me. I said nothing. I reached down slowly and lifted my briefcase from beside my chair. I set it on the table in front of me. I clicked it open. I reached inside with both hands and placed one thing in front of everyone. Gary's face went completely pale, and the room that had gone quiet never recovered. But before I tell you what actually happened, please like and subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Now, let's begin. 31 years is a long time to work somewhere. I had joined Meridian Group in 1993 when I was 31 years old, and the company was 15 years old, and growing in the way that companies grow when they are good at what they do, and the market is ready for it. Meridian was a financial services firm, not a bank, not an investment house, but the specific kind of company that exists in the space between those things, providing analysis and advisory services to institutional clients who needed sophisticated financial guidance without the overhead of a full investment banking relationship. I was hired as a junior analyst. I had a degree in mathematics from Northwestern and 4 years of experience at a smaller firm where I had learned the foundational work thoroughly enough to be useful quickly. I was not the most polished person in the room. I was from a working-class family in Rockford, Illinois, and I had earned my education through scholarships and waitressing jobs and the stubborn conviction of someone who had decided that the gap between where she came from and where she wanted to go was crossable if she was willing to do the work. I was always willing to do the work. I rose through Meridian over 31 years through a combination of genuine ability and the specific willingness to take on the problems that other people found uninteresting or intractable. I became a senior analyst at 38, a director at 44, vice president of quantitative strategy at 51, which was the title I was retiring from at 62. Along the way, I had built and led teams, mentored analysts who were now senior leaders themselves, developed analytical frameworks that the company still used in their current client work, and contributed to a culture that I was proud of, a culture that took the work seriously and treated people decently, and understood that both of those things were possible simultaneously. 31 years. I had given them to Meridian without regret, and I was leaving them with satisfaction, and I was standing at the end of it with a retirement party in my honor and a room full of people I had worked alongside and respected. And Gary Moss standing up with his finger pointed at me. I need to tell you about Gary and about what happened 16 years ago because that is where this story actually lives. In 2008, during the financial crisis, Meridian had faced pressure that required significant internal restructuring. Client relationships were being reviewed. Analytical frameworks were being audited. Decisions were being made about which approaches had weathered the crisis and which had not. I was the director of quantitative strategy at the time. I had spent the previous 2 years developing a risk assessment model, a specific proprietary analytical tool that we called the Merit Framework, which stood for Meridian Enhanced Risk and Integrity Tracker. It was technically sophisticated work that I was genuinely proud of, and it had performed well during the crisis precisely because it had been designed with the stress conditions that the crisis created in mind. The Merit Framework became significant to Meridian in the aftermath of 2008. Clients wanted to understand how we had predicted what we had predicted. The framework became part of our pitch to new clients, part of our published thought leadership, part of our internal training. Gary Moss had been a member of the team that worked on the framework. Not a significant member, he had contributed some supporting analysis in the early stages and had been moved to other work before the framework was completed. His contribution was real but limited, and the documentation of the project reflected this accurately. In 2012, for years after the framework's development, Gary had submitted a formal request to have his name listed as a co-developer on the Merit Framework documentation. He had gone to our then department head, a man named Howard Chin, with a set of claims about his contribution that were, in Howard's assessment and in the assessment of the project documentation, significantly overstated. Howard had reviewed the matter carefully. He had consulted the project records, the meeting notes, the version histories, the email chains, all of it. He had concluded that the existing attribution was accurate and that Gary's request was not supported by the documentation. Gary had been told this. He had not accepted it gracefully. There had been a formal grievance, which had also been reviewed and resolved in the same direction. And then, as far as I knew, the matter had ended. I had not known the full extent of Gary's feelings about it. I had known there had been a grievance. Howard had told me in general terms, as my manager at the time. But I had been insulated from the specifics, which Howard had handled, and I had not sought them out. What I had not known, what I did not learn until the retirement party, was that Gary had carried his version of the story for 16 years, had carried it through Howard's retirement and 3 reorganizations and the departure of most of the people who had direct knowledge of the original project, had carried it with the specific, patient grievance of someone who has told a story so many times internally that it has become, to him, the true version, and had waited, apparently, for the moment when he could say it in a room full of people. My retirement party was that moment. I had brought the briefcase because of Robert. This requires an explanation. Robert has been my husband for 34 years and knows me better than anyone, and he had been watching me prepare for this retirement party with the affectionate attention he brings to watching me prepare for anything important. 2 days before the party, he had sat across from me at our kitchen table while I organized some papers, and he had said, very casually, "Are you bringing the briefcase?" I had looked at him. "Which briefcase?" I said. "The one with the project documentation," he said. I looked at him more carefully. "Why would I bring that?" I said. He shrugged in the mild, innocent way he shrugs when he is not being mild or innocent. 31 years is a long time, he said. You worked hard to build what you built. It seems like you might want to have it close. I thought about this for a moment. Then I went and got the briefcase. The briefcase contained, among other things, the original Merit Framework project documentation. Not copies, the originals, which I had retained when Howard retired, and the physical records were being archived, and I had asked to keep my personal copies of the project materials as a matter of professional pride. The meeting notes in my handwriting, the version histories with timestamps and authorship, the email chains showing the development process, who contributed what and when, the full record of 30 months of work on a project that had mattered. I had not brought it for Gary. I had not known Gary was going to stand up. I had brought it because Robert had suggested I might want to have it close, and I had learned, in 34 years of marriage, that when Robert has a gentle, unexplained suggestion, it is worth acting on. When Gary stood up and pointed at me and said what he said, the room went silent, and every eye went to me, and I sat for a moment with the quiet, and then I reached down and lifted the briefcase. I set it on the table. I clicked it open. I looked at Gary for just a moment, at his face, which had the certainty of a man who has been building toward a moment for 16 years, and then I reached into the briefcase and placed the documentation on the table. Not all of it at once, one item at a time, deliberately, in the silence of 51 people watching. The original project charter, my name as project lead, dated 2006. The first framework draft, version 1.0, my authorship, dated 2006. The meeting notes from the full project run, 30 months of them. Who attended? What was discussed? Who contributed what? The email chain from the version development period, timestamped, showing the evolution of the framework from concept to completion, author by author, decision by decision. And finally, the document from 2012, the formal internal review of Gary's grievance. Howard Chen's conclusion, in writing on company letterhead, that the existing project attribution was accurate and complete, and that Gary's claim of cod envelopment was not supported by the project record. I placed it on top of the stack. I looked at Gary. His face had gone pale during this. Not gradually, in stages, each document landing on the table taking something further from the certainty he had walked in with. By the time the 2012 review was on the table, the certainty was entirely gone. He looked at the stack of documents. He looked at the room. He looked at the CEO, who was seated 3 chairs from Gary and whose expression had moved from stunned to something more deliberate and more concerning for Gary. Gary sat down. He sat down without another word, and he looked at the table in front of him, and he did not look up again for a long time. The room that had gone silent when he stood up and silent again through the document by document laying out of 31 years of careful, attributed, documented work, found its way back to itself slowly. Not the warm noise of the celebration before. Something different. The quiet, steady sound of people who have just witnessed something and are processing what it means. Patricia, my direct manager, stood up. She said, "I have worked with Eleanor Briggs for 11 years. I want to say something that I would have said tonight regardless of what just happened, but that I want to say with particular clarity now." She paused. There is not a single piece of work that Eleanor has put her name on in this company that she did not earn. There is not a framework, a methodology, a client relationship, or a team culture that carries her fingerprints that was not built by her hands and her mind and her willingness to do the hard work that other people sometimes preferred not to do. She looked at me. 31 years of that is not nothing. It is not stealable. It is documented and witnessed and real. And everyone in this room knows it. Several people started clapping. Not everyone immediately, but it grew, and then it was the whole room, and Robert, in his seat nearest the door, was not trying to hide the fact that he was crying. Gary left the party early. He did not speak to me before he left. I saw him stand and gather his jacket and move toward the exit with the specific deliberateness of a man who needs to be somewhere else and has nothing further to say. The HR and legal process that followed his accusation, formal, documented, handled by the company's processes without my direct involvement, resulted in a formal note being placed in his personnel file and a meeting with the CEO that I was not party to and do not know the details of. I have been retired for 7 months, and these things are no longer my business, which is a relief I did not anticipate as clearly as I should have. What I know is that the documentation existed, that I had kept it, not strategically, not in preparation for a confrontation I had anticipated, but because I am someone who keeps careful records of careful work, who has always understood that the documentation is part of the work, that what you build deserves to be attributed accurately and preserved precisely. Robert had known this about me for 34 years. He had known, 2 nights before my retirement party, that the briefcase should be close. He had known it in the way that the people who know us best sometimes know things about us that we have not yet thought to articulate. I am retired now. My days look different than they did for 31 years, slower, wider, full of the things that working life crowds out. Robert, and I have a garden that needed more attention than I was able to give it. I have been giving it attention. The merit framework is still in use at Meridian. The newest analysts are trained on it, modified and updated as the market has required, but built on the original architecture. I know this because Patricia told me at a lunch we had 3 months after my retirement. She said it in the way she says most things, directly, without embellishment, as a fact she thought I should have. I thanked her. She said it wasn't a thank you situation. I disagreed. I think documentation and attribution and the honest accounting of who built what and when and how, I think all of that deserves a thank you when it is done right. It is how the work survives the people who did it. It is how the 31 years stays real after the person who lived them has gone home to her garden. Gary Moss told a room full of people I was a thief. He said it at my retirement party after 16 years of carrying his version of the story, because he believed that time and distance had dissolved the evidence. The evidence does not dissolve. That is the thing about documentation. That is the thing about careful, dated, attributed, preserved records of real work. They wait, exactly as long as they need to. And when the moment comes, they speak for themselves. I just had to open the briefcase.